Faceplant, which is made by Kilohertz, is basically a fully customizable synth. It's got all these really cool snap-in effects and generators and modulators. Honestly, end of the day, really your imagination is the limit when it comes to this synth. If you've never used Faceplant before, the best way I can describe it to you is it's as if someone took a regular synth you're probably more familiar with, something like Serum or Vital, and tossed it into a blender with a modular synth rig or a VST like VCV rack. So before we dive into talking about how Faceplant works, I want to first explain a little bit about how modular synthesis works, because I think that by understanding a little bit about modular synthesis, you're going to be able to understand more about what's happening here in Faceplant. Just so happens I have a modular synth right over here behind me, so let's just take a look at it and put together a really simplistic patch. So even though what we're looking at here might seem really complex, there's actually nothing here that doesn't exist within a standard synth like Serum. We've got a few oscillators here, that's what all three of these are. This is just my ADSR envelope generator. All this is a filter, same with this one with the yellow knobs over here. This is modulation sources, more modulation sources, and the rest of it is basically just audio effects. In order to get sound on a modular synth, what you need to do is patch together the various modules. So I'm going to take my mix output and patch it into input 1 in my audio interface, and we're going to instantly start to hear what this oscillator is producing. Kind of a crazy tone. And it's just going to keep droning like that because all this is a sound-producing oscillator. There's no envelope or anything like that attached to it yet. The nice thing about fixed format synths and most VSTs is that they come pre-patched together, where you have an ADSR envelope in most cases controlling the volume. So you don't get this constantly droning synth. So I have to patch that myself, otherwise I'm not going to be able to talk over this synth. So if I plug the output of Osiris into the input of the VCA, then I take the output of the VCA into my optics. So I'll turn on my modulation sources. This top one here is giving me a steady clock. I'll take the clock output and I'll put it into the gate input, and we're going to start to hear some sound. That's going to continue cycling on forever. I don't have any kind of keyboard attached to this right now, but if I did, then I could sit here and basically take the output of the keyboard gate and then go ahead and use that to trigger the gate on the envelope. All of this is happening more or less behind the scenes in most synths. That includes Faceplant. But where the similarities between Faceplant and Modular lie is that I can connect all of these in pretty much any format and any flow that I want. For example, maybe after I come out of the envelope, I want to take the output of that and go into this distortion unit over here. It's got these fat tubes. I'll go into those tubes. You can see them lighting up as the pluck is being played through them. I'll take the output of the tube, and if I wanted, I could go into an effect, could go into a filter, any filter. I've got multiple choices here. Let's just go ahead into this filter, and we'll take the output of that filter and plug it back into our audio interface. If I want to reverse the flow of those two, all I have to do is swap the cables. In something like Faceplant, all you have to do is swap the snap-ins or swap the modules. We'll get to that though. So I feel like that's enough of a rundown on modular synths to give you an idea for what it's all about, and also to give you an idea as to why I consider Faceplant to be a mostly modular environment that's a bit more accessible than having to fully patch everything up entirely, because some things are already preset for you. This patch that I made over here, I'm going to go ahead and demo a very similar version of this in Faceplant. Now, I do want to say that this is not a full tutorial on this synth. It would take me hours to go through every feature. However, if you are interested in learning about how Faceplant works and getting very knowledgeable about it, we actually just wrote a blog on EDMProd that is a full deep dive into everything that you need to know about Faceplant. Check the link in the description and that'll take you right to it. Let me just make a clean slate here. So when you open up Faceplant, this is pretty much what you see. We have these three big sections: generators, effects, and modulators. Now, I mentioned that over here, my generators were these oscillators, and I was just using a wavetable oscillator called Osiris. Well, I can hover up here, click, and choose from my generators a wavetable. There we go. Now, the nice thing about Faceplant is that whenever you create a generator, it automatically includes your envelope for you. And you can see these little arrows here that show where the signal is flowing. You can think of these as patch cables. So it's taking the output of Wavetable and it's putting it into the input of the envelope. The exact same thing that I did here. I took the output of Osiris and I put it into the input of my VCA, which is being controlled by the envelope generator. And that's exactly what this is right here, a VCA controlled by an envelope generator. I had kind of a plucky sound like that. The next thing that I did on my modular synth was I ran this over into a distortion unit. So here's where we can move over into the effects section. When you click inside here, you see all the different effects that are available. All of these under the essential effects category are free, and all the premium effects, you can purchase them separately. I'll just grab a standard distortion unit and drive it a bit. After the distortion, I sent it to a filter, so I can go down here and add a filter. The way the signal flow works here is down from the top. So as you send audio out of the oscillator into the envelope, it'll go into lane 1 and hit whatever the first active effect unit is in lane 1. And then it will move on to the next one. You don't have to go to lane 1 though. You could also send it over to lane 2 or lane 3. So this is where Faceplant gets even more modular in that you have all this awesome internal routing. If you follow the routing, it goes very linearly to start with. Audio comes out of here, goes to lane 1. After lane 1, it gets sent to lane 2. After lane 2, it gets sent to lane 3. And after lane 3, it gets sent out to the master. But you can mix and match this any which way you want. You could send this to lane 2. You could send lane 2 out to the master directly. And therefore, you just skip over lane 1 and skip over lane 3. And the audio just goes out. No distortion, no filtering, just raw oscillator through the VCA. The last thing I want to quickly show you is the modulator section down here, where we can add LFOs and then click the little plus button. The little plus button will now show you every other point that can be modulated by this LFO. And there's a large number of them. Let's say we want to modulate the filter cutoff. We go ahead and click and drag up or down to increase or decrease the amount of modulation. This is something else that I think really sets Faceplant apart from other synths, is that you can have almost any number of any type of modulator you want down here. You're not limited to whatever the synth gives you. Up to 32 of them. I believe that's the limit in Faceplant, 32 modulators, which is still a huge number. I think in something like Serum, the number of modulators that you have available is 8 LFOs, plus, then you've got your key tracking, you've got your pitch wheel, your modulation wheel. So there's a few extras besides that, but it's much more limited when you consider that you can have up to 32 of any of these in here. Something else that I really love about Faceplant is that you don't have a lot of menu diving to deal with. In a synth like Serum, there are a lot of different menus to go through. Not everything is fully front-facing, and I'm not trying to bag on Serum or any other synths. They're fantastic tools and really good synths, obviously. I just think there's something to be said for having everything so front-facing that you don't have to jump through a bunch of different menus to see what you want to see. If things start to get a little messy, you can go ahead and fold your effects up, keep them all nice and clean and neat. Something else that's very unique about Faceplant is that you can modulate a lot of things at audio rate. In this way, you can achieve frequency modulation much more easily and much more creatively. Whenever you see a little green plus in Faceplant, that means that you can take the output of that oscillator and modulate anything else, including itself. So if I take the output of this oscillator, which we're not going to hear because there's no envelope, and then I map it to the phase of this oscillator, really quick and easy FM. But this patch that I have going on here is basically the equivalent of what I have going right here. No output from the second oscillator. We have FM from B and the third harmonic creating the FM. The only difference is that now here in Serum, we're done. But in Phase Plant, we can go in here and add more FM. Take the output of this, and I will modulate the modulating oscillator. And we're not limited to just FMing the oscillators either. We can FM effects. If I hover between the envelope and the generator, then I can go ahead and add distortion filter, a nonlinear filter, a few other things in here too. I'll add a filter and I'll double click this modulation point to detach it and click it again. And now we can see I can do frequency modulation of the cutoff filter. Give that a little bit of modulation. Let's take a listen. Without modulation and with it. There's not a lot of synths out there that let you do this. You can also FM the amount of distortion drive too. Would be cool to do this with something like a wavetable. Could get a little noisy and crazy. Let's just find out. We still have our original FM. Now we're FMing effects. One of the cooler things I think about this synth. Something else unique about Phase Plant is that it has built-in parallel processing. And when I'm talking about that, I'm referring back over to these lanes that we mentioned before. As I mentioned earlier in the video, we can send these lanes to other lanes, not necessarily having them be sequentially processed. For example, maybe I want lane 1 to just affect the top end of the sound, and lane 2 can be for the sub bass. And then I can recombine them in lane 3. Well, in order to do that, I take the output of lane 1, send it over to lane 3, and I can grab another envelope and send this envelope over to lane 2. So what I've done here is create a duplicate signal. I'm duplicating it, sending this one to lane 1 and this one to lane 2. Now I can go ahead and add some filtering. The first one, I'll put this at like 100 hertz or so. The second one, I'll also put it at 100 hertz, so I'll make it a high pass. Something like that. And if we solo just lane 1, there's your sub, lane 2, just your top end. So I can go in here and add a little distortion to my sub without affecting the tops, and add some chorusing to the tops without affecting the sub. But there's actually another way in Phase Plant that you can do parallel processing, and that would be using Snap Heap. So once you get Snap Heap involved, this is where Phase Plant does actually get a little menu divey, because what Snap Heap is an internal environment within Phase Plant, which basically expands the buses that you're using for more effects, up to 7 serial or parallel buses. So serial, of course, meaning that anything that goes in this bus gets processed next by this, next. But if you click this button down here, all of a sudden we've turned these into parallel buses. And that means that anything going through this will also go through this. And then at the end, it will be mixed back together again. I'll turn all of these ones off for right now and focus just on these two. We also have a whole new row of modulators down here. So for example, maybe I want to add another filter, this time a peak filter. And then over here, I can do another type of filter. Let's do a notch. And then I'll add an LFO to modulate the cutoff of this one, kind of keep it more towards the top end of the sound. And I'll add another LFO to modulate this one, keeping it more towards the low end of the sound. So honestly, it's really endless, because then inside Snap Heap, you could go and add another Snap Heap, and the rabbit hole continues. It gets really crazy. But that's one of the things that makes this synth so powerful. Another really cool thing about Faceplant involves the wavetable, and most wavetable synths have the ability to edit those wavetables. Faceplant's a little bit different, and it's pretty cool what you can do here. If I click this button right here, that will open up the wavetable editor. If you're familiar with Serum, this should look fairly familiar to you. I can go here and draw in harmonics to create different types of sounds. I can also use these little wheels down here to rotate the phase of certain harmonics, which again will give us different waveforms. And then clicking up here, we can see what wavetable number we're on, 105. And then this brings us over to the square waves, which are towards the end of the table. But where this really shines is the fact that you have the ability to add effects like distortion, dispersion, crazy filtering, all kinds of weird stuff to these wavetables. And you can do it in these little chunks, and it makes it very easy. Like if I were to slide, just grab that little bit. I'm just clicking, holding, and dragging. And I'm choosing wavetable 56 to 109. If I click effects up here, I could go and add a dispersion effect. And then down here, I can dial in the amount of it. I can say like, I want like a lot of dispersion, but I want to mix it back a little bit. So like that's how it originally looked. Let's just add a little bit of dispersion right there. So I'll hit done. There we go. Now we've got dispersion effect starting right here. Let's go in here and add some more effects. This little chunk of it, I want to distort it with some weird biasing, lots of drive. And we can choose different distortion types too. Get it really wacky. I think that's good. And then on this little frame, I'm going to go ahead and say we drive it more. Pull the bias down, and we'll add another little keyframe and turn the mix down here and hit done. So now as we travel through all of these, we can see the different changes I made. And in that way, you can go ahead and create your own wavetables out of this. Super easily. The next difference I think is worth mentioning is the fact that you can add an effect any number of times you want. Whereas in most synths, you get an effect one time, like you have one distortion and you have one EQ and one compressor. Here in Faceplant, you can have a flanger, and then if I just hold Option and click, I can duplicate it. Another flanger with different settings, and then another flanger with different settings, and another flanger, and another, and another, and another, so on. It's really fun to be able to stack effects like this, and it opens up a really wide realm of possibilities for post-processing and making really unusual, crazy sounds. Something else that's really neat about Faceplant is that they keep updating it in little bits and pieces, whereas like most synths have a full update where it's a version 2 of the synth. Because of how modular Faceplant is, they're able to add in a single new effect or a new generator that completely changes how you might use the synth or greatly expands the abilities of the synth. An example of this would be the granular engine. Faceplant didn't have a granular engine for a long time, but they added one in, and here it is, and it's super sick. They also keep adding really unique effects like filter table. This is one of my favorites now. It's a wavetable that is also a filter. Think about that for a second. A wavetable that's a filter. I've never seen anything like it personally. Maybe there's something that exists out there that I'm unaware of, but and yeah, because it's a wavetable, you can get in here and edit the wavetable exactly like you would a normal one. Let's add some effects, maybe distortion, and bias it. I don't know, this might be horrendous. I have no idea what it's going to sound like. It looks like I just created some kind of a weird low pass. Interesting. Now, if I start coloring in some of the harmonics down here, I think I'd create kind of like a band pass. I only did it on that one frame though, so let's go to that first frame. Okay, here's the super weird thing I just made. I don't think there's anything like that out there. This is just one of the sickest things, one of the more recent additions to Faceplant. But that just goes to show that this is going to just continue to be built on and added to. Very unique in the way that they are approaching this particular synth. Hopefully this has helped you see how this synth is different than so many others, and also help you to decide whether or not it's right for you. Some people love the customizability, some people just want the synth built for them already. I understand that. I understand sometimes I'm just not in the mood to open up Faceplant and make another patch from scratch. Other times I know there's some stuff I can do in Faceplant that I can't do anywhere else, and I definitely get excited about exploring all of these weird possibilities inside an environment that's so customizable and so modular.